It is said that there's nothing new under the sun, and I add, under the moon also. But writers keep writing, artists keep drawing, people continue putting out music. You know, what is it that you can bring? What new can you bring to this world? Welcome to Oral Tradition and another adventure in Guyanese literature. And let's also welcome again Berkley Semple, who has won the Guyana Prize 2 times. And we'll talk about that later. 2 times. And he's got a long list of experiences behind his name. Berkley, welcome again to Oral Tradition.
Thank you for having me.
I said, there's nothing new. But yet we keep producing, creatives keep producing, writers keep writing. What new can you bring to interest a reader, an editor, a publisher? What new can you as a writer?
That's a good question. I think with respect to the new, I think there are new ways of saying old things. You know, I mean, even things that exist and people have been writing about them for years, love or death or mercy or kindness, you know. There are new ways of saying those things or getting at it in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes writing, I think, for me, at least, almost always new every time I put pen to paper, because I have an ambition to say something, at least something new about something that already exists, something old. So I do work at that. I'm aware of maybe all of the different ways that a thing can be said, but I think in terms of a personal ambition, is to say it in a way that is different than what's being said. I mean, and part of that is writing about Guyana. And I don't know how many people know the literature of Guyana, but Guyana is novel. It's a novel subject matter. The Guyanese people, the Guyanese landscape, the sea, the sun, the farmers, all of that.
The
maybe
interior.
to many people.
Mm-hmm.
To many people. So, because my sole subject is Guyana and Guyanese things, I can teach a great many people about Guyana as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's a worthy subject. You know, it may not be new to you and me, but it's certainly new to many people who will, read it.
And it's a novel, and people are clamoring for Caribbean
Right.
and Guyanese literature.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's a boom in Guyanese literature. I'm very impressed by the Guyana Prize. Certainly, the new writers that have been exposed on the Guyana Prize. I read quite a few of them. Jamal LaRose, I think he's a really fine poet.
Yeah.
Nahil Shankar, also, I read some of his stuff. So I'm really impressed by the new people, man. I just love it. I think we're going through a boom in literature,
Mm-hmm.
and I think these people have some worthy things to say about Guyana and about their generation, and I think some of it is pretty fine writing. I think that they're only getting better. That's my opinion. You know,
So, it can only get better.
I read the old guys too. So
Well, of course.
the canon,
You got to do the canon,
right?
the emerging, and then a little bit of criticism also in between.
There you go.
There you go, to get a good
So
picture.
I read the classics.
Yeah.
I read Wilson Harris. I read Martin Carter. I read Fred Degar and David Dabydeen and so on.
Yeah.
So Sis Narayan Prasad. So I just read everything that Guyanese writers publish, you know, because I think some of them say the old things sometimes really, really new, you know, in ways. Let me give you, I mean, I think, for instance, of Wilson Harris, he's always new to me when I come back to him, you know. Even when you read, say, Palace of the Peacock, you think you understand, right? So when you come back to it, it's like, oh, I didn't understand that in the first instance when I read it. So it's actually new to you every time you go to it. you know what I'm saying? It's really interesting thing. Like I would see, like, oh, I didn't notice that metaphor before, but it's so good,
Yeah.
you know. So,
Yeah.
so some writers, you're always going back to them because they're so, they're so wonderfully good, and they have so much depth that you don't understand it in the first reading, and so every time you read them, it's like you're discovering something new altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Interestingly, they the saying "There's nothing new under the sun." It's part of a verse from Ecclesiastes.
Hmm.
A beautiful book.
Yes.
Yeah,
I've read it.
beautiful book.
Mhm.
But the other part of it is that it says something to this effect: "What was will be, and what has been will continue to be." Like there is um, a circle,
Mhm.
right, recurring of things. So there's really nothing new. What had been will be.
Mhm.
Right. It's a beautiful line also.
Yes.
Whichever had it. It's a
It's
beautiful
lovely.
line. So as you're saying about saying all things in a new way, new perspective, yeah. And that is interesting because I'm sure for publishers
Mhm.
who are investing would like to see some return.
Yes.
So
It's a business.
it's a business.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, one would think that there would be no other ways to write about love, right? But people do all of the time in very novel ways.
And very often time the very first subject they tackle.
There you go. There you go. It's something literally close to our hearts. So yes, it's fascinating. The expectation of new. Let us think on that. When you say new, um, it might be something you have never seen before, but you personally, but it might be that others have. So the newness of Guyana to the rest of the world might be the thing that is interesting to people as a new thing, because they may not be familiar with history. I'll give you an example. I have in my new book, Kipling Plaids, which is my first novel. It seems so strange that at 56 I'm publishing my first novel, but that is a fact. One of the things there is the language, the Guyanese Creole, and so when you're talking to your publisher, they're saying, well, this word is new to us, like coker, for instance, or plimple, yeah.
Yes.
So these things are new to them. They've never heard it before. So how do you get this across to a reader who is not essentially Guyanese, And that was kind of a challenge in itself, So the newness is coming out of the language itself.
Of the language.
Yeah, where they're not familiar with certain words, they're not familiar with the Creole language itself. So you're introducing them, even when you're talking about love, into a new kind of language,
Yeah.
a new kind of glossary. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not new in every possible way, but it's new in this
In different
specific way.
respect, and that's
Yeah.
right. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Bascom used one of his plays, cockle house, I think. It's a word.
Yeah.
It's an English word.
I know the
But
word.
then it took off a greater meaning after he wrote about it, and a very successful play at that. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
You mentioned Fred just now,
Right.
a poet and a novelist
Yes.
from the same area that you grew up in.
From Iconi, yes.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna talk about this transition from poetry to fiction a bit later. Let's tackle that now. Let's tackle that by going through your poetry. All right, let's go through your poetry, the development of your work in poetry. Talk a bit about your poetry, all right, and your development for collections of, and then we'll talk about that transition
Sure.
to fiction.
Sure. My first collection was Lamplight Teller,
Yeah.
which I submitted for the Guyana Prize in 2004. It was a master's thesis, the master's manuscript for my master's degree,
Uh-huh.
and then I got it published. So, and reading it, rereading it, you know, you can see how much you improve from, say, the first book to the last, because you learn so much more in the interim, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
I publish essentially one book every 7 years or so, except for the last one, which was 10 years.
Okay.
Took 10 years between the Solo Flyer, which is my third book. I mean, the Central Station,
Central
which is my
Station.
third book, and Flight and Other Poems, which is my fourth book. 10 years between that period. It doesn't mean I wasn't publishing, but I published a lot of stuff in journal and so on. So,
Yeah.
but my poetry, it significantly addressed the Guyanese politics and just the daily life, you know, the daily life, much more keener, I think, in my last book than I ever did before. Because I can see much more, and I'm older and more experienced, you know, and you have a kind of a different way of seeing things, you know, your eyes. After all, poetry is a way of seeing things, isn't it? It's a way of seeing, it's a way of kind of ensuring that people understand what you're saying.
It's challenging both on the writer and the reader.
That's right. That's right. Poetry itself, and I find this more so as I improve, as I get older and start writing more, is that it can surprise you yourself as a writer. Right? When you're writing, you're like, oh, that's a lovely word.
Yeah.
You know, like Mittelholzer does in some of his.
And a lovely
some of his
phrase
books.
that you
Yeah.
coined. Yeah.
Like a trick. So, did I say that? Sometimes you misbelieve that it's someone else. You think it's somebody else is saying it. Somebody else is that wise, but it's actually you.
A lot of newness coming out here.
Right. Yes. So you're learning as you go. It's good.
So those are poetry, which is taxing to write and also
Yeah.
taxing on the reader, because it's so concise
Right.
that a wrong word in the wrong place may send a
Mess
different
it up. Yeah.
something.
Yeah. It's a kind of fundamental definition of poetry.
Yeah.
It's to the degree it's the right words arranged in the right order. That's difficult, you know, because you don't always know what the right word is. You know, because your perspective may be narrow. It may be parochial in the sense that you're kind of, you know, very narrowly, or it may be cosmopolitan. Either way, your frame of reference can be broadened, depends on the kind of poem that you're writing, you know. If you're writing from a city, I'm from the countryside, so even in Guyana here, I'm a countryside kind of poet. You know what I'm saying? You gotta have the fishermen in there and the coconut peelers and you know, the kind of daily feel. I'm not a Georgetown sort of poet, but the subject matter is universal.
The themes,
Yeah, they're universal. And the metaphors are identifiable, certainly Guyanese mythology.
Yeah.
It's a serious thing in my work. Politics, a frame of reference.
Yes,
there.
yeah, of course,
So-
the social context.
Social context, yeah.
Yeah.
All of it helps.
Let's go to the transition from poetry to fiction.
Difficult, because I'm a reader of fiction. Fiction to me is a kind of a struggle, and also I'm not as confident in fiction. But I think
Reading fiction is a struggle, or writing fiction?
writing
Ah,
fiction,
ah.
reading is my thing.
Yeah.
It's what I do, and I read everything. You know, I'm not averse to reading a romance novel. I would do that, or a comic book. I would read
Yeah.
things that are interesting to me. But writing fiction, I felt was much more difficult, because I could only write fiction well if I was lyrical in prose, in writing a lyrical prose, you know, like I would poetry.
Ah,
You see what I'm saying? So I had to have some schooling in that,